Your Honor, she can't even pay her own bills. My brother laughed, gesturing at my plain suit. He had dragged me into court to strip me of my rights to our family's $36 million estate. The judge smirked, looking down at me over his glasses. She really thinks she's qualified to run an empire? The entire courtroom snickered, watching me like I was a joke. I didn't flinch. I slowly walked to the podium, pulled out a classified federal folder, and adjusted my uniform lapel under my coat. I looked the judge dead in the eye and said, "My name is Captain Victoria Collins, Chief Special Investigator for the Federal Judicial Conduct Commission, and this courtroom is officially under federal audit." The judge's smirk instantly vanished. His face turned ghost white. My brother's jaw dropped as 3 armed federal marshals walked in and sealed the doors. "My name is Victoria Collins. I'm 34 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my family treated me like the quiet disappointment who couldn't make it on her own. While my older brother, Julian, strutted around in designer suits boasting about his business genius, I was the daughter who stayed in the background, working long hours and keeping my head down. When our father passed away, leaving behind a logistics empire valued at $36 million, Julian didn't waste a single second. He moved swiftly to crush me, filing emergency probate motions and crafting a completely fabricated story to ensure I'd be left with nothing. Now, standing in the cold, polished oak room of the county court, Julian leaned against the mahogany table with supreme confidence. His high-priced defense team sat beside him, nodding along as Julian presented binder after binder of forged bank statements and manipulated medical records. According to his lawyers, I was financially irresponsible, mentally unstable, and entirely unfit to touch a single cent of our father's legacy. Julian turned toward the gallery, catching my eye with a sharp, mocking grin that signaled he believed he had already won. The judge leaned forward over his bench, smirking down at my simple dark coat and plain leather bag. "It seems clear to this court," the judge announced, reaching for his pen to sign the order stripping me of my rights, "that Miss Collins lacks the competence to oversee even a fraction of this estate." I didn't panic. I didn't raise my voice. I simply stepped up to the center podium, resting my hands on a thick, sealed leather briefcase. I looked past Julian's arrogant smirk, locked eyes directly with the magistrate, and opened my dark coat to reveal the pristine silver insignia pinned to my blazer lapel. "Your Honor," I said, my voice echoing clearly through the silenced room. "Before you sign that paper, you should know that my name is Captain Victoria Collins, Chief Special Investigator for the Federal Judicial Conduct Commission. And as of 10 seconds ago, this entire proceeding, and your courtroom, is under federal audit." To understand how my own brother could stand in a public courtroom and try to destroy my life, you have to understand the web of lies he spent a decade spinning. Julian was 3 years older, born with an overwhelming sense of entitlement that my parents, in their blind affection, mistook for leadership. While he spent his 20s burning through company loans to fund a lifestyle of luxury cars, high-stakes gambling, and empty titles, I chose a very different path. I left home, joined military intelligence, and eventually transitioned into federal law enforcement. Because my work required absolute discretion and top-secret clearance, I couldn't brag about my promotions at family dinners. Julian took full advantage of my silence. He carefully constructed a false narrative to our dying father and our extended family, claiming I was adrift, unstable, and incapable of holding down a real job. Every time I was deployed or working an active investigation, Julian told everyone I was hiding from my debts. He manipulated my father's fading memory during his final months, ensuring that every legal document was rerouted through his personal attorneys. By the time our father passed away, Julian had convinced every relative, neighbor, and family friend that I was a bitter, greedy leech, coming back only to claim money I didn't deserve. He thought my quiet nature was weakness, and he truly believed his carefully built mountain of lies would protect him forever. As I stood at the podium, the silence in the room became absolute. The faint hum of the air conditioner was the only sound left as Julian's confident smile slowly withered into confusion. He looked at his high-priced lead attorney, expecting a sharp objection, but the lawyer was staring intently at the federal seal on my badge, his own face draining of color. Before anyone could move, the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. 3 armed federal marshals in dark suits stepped inside, taking positions along the perimeter and securing every exit. The gallery let out a collective gasp. Julian took a nervous step forward, his voice cracking as his arrogant demeanor finally faltered. "Victoria, what is this ridiculous circus? You can't just bring fake federal agents in here to intimidate us." "They aren't here for a show, Julian," I replied, my voice calm, level, and entirely devoid of emotion. "They're here because when you tried to strip me of my inheritance, you didn't just target me. You stumbled directly into an ongoing federal sting operation." I unclasped my briefcase and pulled out a stack of red-stamped documents, setting them cleanly on the podium. Julian had spent years assuming I was just a naive, struggling sister who wouldn't understand complex corporate accounting. He thought he was being clever when he opened dozens of offshore shell accounts under the guise of managing our father's estate. In reality, he was laying a paper trail of wire fraud and money laundering that my unit had been tracking for 6 months. He had walked right into the trap. The judge's face had turned from a smug grin to a pale mask of shock. His grip tightened around his pen as he realized the room was no longer under his authority. "Miss Collins, or Captain Collins, this is highly irregular," he stammered, his voice lacking the booming authority it had just minutes ago. "This is a state probate court. You cannot simply barge into my chamber proceedings and claim federal jurisdiction. I am calling an immediate recess." He raised his wooden gavel, intending to strike the sound block and clear the room, but I didn't move an inch. "I wouldn't touch that gavel, Your Honor," I said firmly, lifting a second folder bound in official yellow tape. "Because this folder doesn't just contain my brother's financial records, it contains yours." The magistrate froze mid-motion, his hand hovering inches above the desk. The gallery leaned forward in dead silence as I opened the file and began reading directly into the record. Between March of last year and 3 weeks ago, 3 distinct wire transfers totaling $240,000 were routed from an offshore account in the Cayman Islands to a real estate holding company registered under your wife's maiden name. 2 days after each payment, key motions in this probate dispute were mysteriously granted in my brother's favor without a single hearing. I walked up the steps to the bench and placed the subpoena directly on his desk, right next to his signed order. You didn't just side with Julian because you believed his fabricated evidence. You sided with him because he bought you. You took campaign contributions, luxury Tahoe trips, and direct kickbacks to expedite this theft. And right now, 2 special agents are waiting in your private chambers with a federal search warrant. Julian's lead attorney slowly closed his leather binder, stood up without saying a word, and gathered his papers. "Your Honor," the lawyer said, his voice completely stripped of its earlier confidence. "In light of these unforeseen federal developments, my firm is formally withdrawing as counsel for Mr. Julian Reed, effective immediately." Julian looked at his legal team in total disbelief, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Withdraw! You can't withdraw! I paid you a $200,000 retainer," he yelled, his voice echoing frantically off the high plaster walls. But his high-priced lawyers didn't even look back at him as they moved away from the table, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive wreckage of his defense. The smug, controlling big brother who had entered the courtroom was completely gone. In his place stood a terrified man realizing that the money, the lies, and the high-powered connections could no longer shield him. He spun toward me, clutching the edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning white. "Victoria, please," he pleaded, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. We're family. You can't do this to me. Think about what Dad would say if he were here right now. Dad is the reason I'm standing here, Julian, I said, stepping closer until I was looking him directly in the eyes. When Dad was dying in that hospice bed, crying in pain, you didn't show up once. You were busy transferring his stock accounts to shell corporations and picking out custom leather seats for your sports cars. You left me alone to wipe his forehead, hold his hand, and pay his medical prescriptions out of my own pocket, while you told the world I was a failure. I leaned in, my voice cold as ice. Family loyalty was a one-way street for you, Julian. You didn't care about family when you tried to throw me out on the street, and you certainly don't get to hide behind it now. The federal marshals moved in with quiet, practiced efficiency. 2 agents stepped up to the bench, standing on either side of the judge as they presented him with the formal administrative hold order. Without a word, the magistrate slowly removed his black robes, his hands trembling as he set them on the high leather desk. He looked broken, stripped of the unyielding authority he had used to terrorize ordinary people in this room for over a decade. At the same time, additional federal agents moved to the primary evidence table, systematic and precise. They gathered every falsified bank statement, every altered trust document, and every laptop Julian's team had brought into the room. A special agent stepped up to the clerk's desk and handed her an official federal freeze order. Within seconds, every single personal and corporate account associated with Julian, his shell companies, and his offshore holdings was locked tight. The probate case was formally called, and with the corrupt judge replaced by the presiding emergency magistrate, the fraudulent filings were dismissed with prejudice. The court immediately validated the authentic, uncorrupted trust documents, the ones my father had secretly entrusted to my unit months before his passing. I was appointed as the sole, rightful executor of the entire $36 million estate, exactly as my father had intended. Julian slumped into his chair, staring blankly at the polished floor as the weight of his absolute ruin finally set in. In a single afternoon, his manufactured empire had crumbled, his stolen wealth was gone, and the power dynamic that had defined our lives for 34 years was permanently reversed. 6 months after that unforgettable day in court, the dust has finally settled, and the truth stands clear for everyone to see. Julian was indicted on multiple federal charges, including grand larceny, wire fraud, and systematic money laundering. Stripped of his stolen wealth and abandoned by his fair-weather friends, he is currently awaiting sentencing, facing up to 15 years in federal prison. The corrupt judge was forced into a disgraceful immediate retirement before being officially disbarred, and he now faces a separate criminal trial for judicial bribery. As for our father's $36 million estate, I didn't keep it locked away or squander it on luxury. I spent the last half year cleaning up the mess Julian left behind, restoring the logistics business to its original integrity, and paying back every single employee and creditor my brother had cheated. With my portion of the inheritance, I launched the Collins Foundation for Financial Justice, an organization dedicated to helping vulnerable family members fight back against legal coercion and financial abuse. I finally built the life my father always wanted for me, one defined by honor, independence, and strength. Standing up in that courtroom didn't just save my legacy, it taught me that truth always finds a way into the light, no matter how thick the lies are. Now, after hearing my story, I have to ask you, if you were standing in that courtroom, facing a sibling who tried to strip away everything you owned, how would you have handled it? Would you have fought back the same way, or walked away entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to check out the 2 videos on your screen for more stories of justice and unbelievable revenge. Thank you for watching.